Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're talking about how to use light and shadow to your advantage when glassing mule deer. And honestly, this is one of the biggest differences between hunters who occasionally spot bucks and hunters who consistently find mature mule deer in country everybody else says is empty. Because mule deer don't just use terrain for security, they use light, they use shade, they use contrast, and mature bucks are masters at positioning themselves where the mountain helps hide them. A lot of deer hunters glass too fast, focus too much on open country, and completely overlook the dark pockets where mature deer spend most of their day. Then they wonder why they only see small bucks or does. But the reality is, big mule deer are often visible for just tiny moments: a flicker of an ear, the curve of a back, the white of a face, a single antler tine catching light. If you understand how sunlight moves across the mountain, you're going to start seeing more deer that hunters walk right past. If you're not familiar with who I am, I've been hunting and guiding Western big game for over 34 years, and I've been a professional strength conditioning and nutrition coach for more than 30 years, and I'm here to help you become a more successful and consistent mule deer hunter. One of the biggest mistakes mule deer hunters make is treating shadows like dead space. Hunters naturally look toward bright openings because our eyes are drawn to movement and visibility. But mature bucks know that. They survive by bedding where their body shape disappears into uneven light. A buck doesn't need thick cover necessarily to vanish. He just needs a little bit of broken contrast. That's why mature deer love brush pockets below rock bands, timber edges, shaded cuts, just folds in a hillside, or little shelves that create uneven light across their body. And here's the important part: your brain wants to identify full deer, but when glassing mature bucks in shadows, you're rarely going to see the whole animal at once. You're looking for small pieces. Maybe it's a horizontal back line that doesn't match the slope angle. Maybe it's an ear flick. Maybe it's the white patch around an eye. Maybe it's just a tine reflecting sunlight for half a second. The hunters who consistently find mature bucks don't glass shadows casually. They dissect them slowly. They expect deer to be hidden there before they ever even lift their binoculars. That mindset changes the whole game. One of the best places to find mule deer is the edge where sunlight meets shade. That transition line creates contrast, and contrast exposes animals. A fully shaded buck can disappear almost completely, but when part of his body catches that sunlight, suddenly your eyes pick him up. This is why bucks often get spotted standing just inside timber edges or under cliff bands, or just beside brush patches where only part of their body is exposed. A lot of deer hunters waste time staring deep into dark shadows where there's very little visual separation instead of focusing first on the edge. Work the line where the mountain changes from bright to dark. You're often going to catch antler tips glowing in sunlight before you ever see the deer attached to them. You're going to see a face illuminated for 1 second when the buck turns his head. You're going to notice an ear movement because the light catches it differently than the background. That's how mature mule deer get found. Not because they were standing in the open, but because the light exposed tiny details long enough for an experienced deer hunter to recognize them. Now, early morning is one of the very best times to catch mule deer moving before they settle into secure bedding areas. And the lighting during that first hour matters a lot. And you've already got to be there to catch this. That low angle morning sunlight creates long shadows that can either help you or hurt you depending on where you're glassing from. If the sun is at your back, you're usually going to get better contrast into opposite facing slopes. Deer movement becomes easier to detect because bodies separate visually from the terrain. This is especially important during the first few minutes of daylight when bucks are still feeding, transitioning, and moving towards the bedding cover. You're not always finding fully exposed deer. In fact, you're probably rarely finding that. A lot of times, you're just catching movement with mature deer: a buck crossing through openings between brush patches, or a silhouette walking a ridge, or just leg movement through scattered timber. Morning also creates short windows where bucks briefly expose themselves sometimes before bedding in shadows for most of the day. And mature bucks are often late movers. That's important to note here. A lot of hunters stop glassing too early after sunrise, but older bucks, they might still be repositioning while the younger deer are already bedded. Those extra 20 or 30 minutes can completely change what you find.
Hey, if you're serious about becoming a more consistent mule deer hunter, I built a mule deer hunting series of ebooks to walk you through my entire process step by step. This is a 7-volume system designed specifically for Western hunters pursuing mule deer in real mountain and public land environments. In volume 1, Foundations and Reality, you're going to learn how to understand how mule deer actually live, the myths that mislead most hunters, and the mindset required for consistent success. In volume 2, Finding Mule Deer and Understanding Pressure, you're going to learn how mule deer move across the landscape and how hunting pressure changes their behavior. In volume 3, Terrain, Aspect, and Positioning, you're going to learn how to read mule deer country and position yourself correctly using terrain and wind. In volume 4, Glassing, Visual Discipline, and Buck Identification, you're going to learn how to find mule deer, glass efficiently, and identify mature bucks. In volume 5, Early Season and High Country Strategy, you're going to learn how to hunt velvet and early season bucks in alpine terrain. In volume 6, Rut, Transition, and Late Season Movement, we're going to talk about understanding migration, cold weather movement, and how bucks shift through the season. And in volume 7, Execution and Decision Stacking, we're going to talk about how to close the distance, execute under pressure, and make disciplined decisions during the stalk. If you want to hunt mule deer with structure instead of guesswork, you can buy them individually, or you can bundle all volumes together and save 50% off the entire mule deer hunting series of ebooks at backboneunlimited.com.
A lot of deer hunters mentally check out once the morning movement slows down, and I think that's a mistake as well. Midday can actually be one of the best times to locate mature mule deer if you understand how sunlight changes bedding visibility. I know this has been the prime time for me. As the sun climbs higher, the shadows are going to shrink and shift, so tiny pieces of that buck that were hidden earlier might suddenly become visible. An antler tip catches light, or a gray back separates from a dark timbered background, or the white around the muzzle pops against shadow. Sometimes all you need is one small visual clue. This is why patient glassers consistently turn up deer that other hunters swear aren't there. They keep rechecking high probability bedding zones as the lighting conditions evolve. And mature bucks, they love predictable shade, north facing slopes, scattered timber pockets, rock overhangs, isolated cedars, avalanche chutes, and brushy benches. All of those create cooler bedding conditions during warm daylight hours. Midday isn't about covering country fast either. It's about slowing down enough to pick apart terrain carefully. A lot of mature bucks are not fully exposed during the middle of the day. They're only partially visible. And if you train yourself to look for fragments instead of whole deer, your success rate is going to go way up. One thing exposed mule deer hunters learn is that the mountain changes constantly throughout the day. As shadows move, deer move too. A bedding pocket that offers perfect shade at 8 o'clock in the morning might be fully exposed by 10:30. Once sunlight starts heating that location up, bucks are often going to shift beds to stay comfortable and concealed. Sometimes they only move a little bit, right? I've seen them work just around the same rock throughout the day, right? But it gave me enough opportunity to see that they were there. Sometimes they might just move 20 yards. Sometimes they slide into timber. Sometimes they drop lower into darker cover. Sometimes they just stand briefly and rebed really close. Those short repositioning windows are incredibly important for glassers. A buck that was completely invisible earlier might suddenly expose himself during that transition. This is one of the reasons mature mule deer seem to appear out of nowhere. They were there the entire time, right? The lighting conditions simply changed enough for you to finally see them. That's why I constantly reglass productive terrain instead of bouncing to new basins too quickly. The best mule deer hunters I know aren't just watching deer, they're watching low light and how it interacts with terrain over time. That gives them the ability to predict where bucks are most likely to stay hidden throughout the day. And, I think most hunters only think good glassing conditions happen when sunlight fully illuminates the deer, but the backlighting can actually help you spot bucks if you know what to look for. When the sun is behind an animal, details disappear, color disappears too, but outlines become important. So instead of searching for brown bodies, you start looking for unnatural shapes, a horizontal backline, the curve of a chest, ear shapes above brush, antler forks breaking the skyline, leg gaps beneath the body. Mature mule deer often blend perfectly with the terrain color, especially in dry western country, but shape, that's a lot harder to hide. This becomes really important when glassing ridges, open timber, sparse brush, or skyline transitions during early and late light. And honestly, this is where a lot of hunters glass too aggressively. They move too fast trying to force detail instead of slowing down enough to actually recognize the patterns that their brain is seeing. Good mule deer glassing is not about constantly trying to identify a buck. It is about noticing something that doesn't belong, then confirming it slowly through optics. That patience is what separates experienced glassers from frustrated hunters. And one of the worst things you can do while glassing mule deer is force yourself to look directly into harsh sunlight or glare. When the sun hits your optics wrong, that contrast is going to disappear. Terrain gets washed out, shadows flatten, and those details are going to completely vanish. And mature bucks become incredibly difficult to spot. This happens constantly during early morning and late evening if your glassing position is poorly chosen. Sometimes the solution is really simple, though. Move 50 yards, shift your angle, use a tree or a ridge or a rock to block that direct sunlight from hitting your lens. Maybe sometimes that could even be setting up a tarp. Those small adjustments can dramatically improve your visibility. I also think deer hunters underestimate how much eye fatigue affects glassing quality. If you spend hours staring through glare, your eyes are going to get tired fast and your ability to detect subtle movement is going to drop. Good glassing isn't just about having powerful optics either. It's about putting yourself in positions where the lighting helps your eyes work efficiently, not against you. Whenever possible, I want sunlight improving the contrast instead of trying to fight it, because mature mule deer are already hard enough to spot without making visibility worse for ourselves. Most deer hunters don't miss mule deer because the deer weren't there. They miss them because they glassed too fast once and then they moved on. And I think that that's a huge mistake. So that's why I'm spending so much time talking about this. Mature bucks are masters at blending into terrain, especially broken country with scattered brush, rock, timber, and shifting light conditions. The first pass through a basin usually finds the obvious deer, the easy ones. The second pass finds some hidden deer. But the third pass, that usually finds the mature bucks. That's because your eyes start recognizing terrain patterns the longer you study an area. And once you understand the terrain better, unnatural details are going to become easier to notice. I can't tell you how many bucks I've found after staring at the exact same hillside for 30 minutes or more. A tine flashes, an ear moves, a deer stands up from the shade, light changes enough to expose a bedded buck, or just all of a sudden, I recognize something that didn't belong. This is where patience becomes a massive advantage. Most deer hunters physically leave before the mountain actually reveals what's there. But the hunters who stay disciplined and methodical consistently turn up older age class deer that everybody else overlooked. Now, one of the biggest shifts you can make as a mule deer hunter is realizing light is part of the terrain itself. It changes the visibility, it changes bedding behavior, it changes movement, and it changes what you're actually capable of seeing through your optics. Mature mule deer bucks survive because they understand how to disappear inside broken country, uneven contrast, shadows, and timing. They don't have to leave the mountain to become invisible. They just need hunters to glass too quickly or look in the wrong places or not be patient. The best glassers I know aren't randomly scanning country. The best glassers I know aren't randomly scanning country. They're not hoping to get lucky. They're reading sunlight. They're watching the shadow lines. They're studying contrast. They're reglassing productive terrain as conditions change throughout the day. And once you start understanding how that light interacts with mule deer behavior, you're going to realize something really important. A lot of the bucks hunters think are gone were never gone at all. They were there the whole time. The mountain just hid them better than a lot of deer hunters know how to look. Now, if you want to go deeper into mule deer movement, pressure patterns, terrain positioning, and structured decision making, that's exactly why I built the Mule Deer Hunting series of ebooks. It's a progressive system designed to help you understand how mule deer actually use country and how to position yourself accordingly. I have a link to those ebooks in the description. And if you want ongoing access to the Team Backbone community, classroom, my full digital vault of mule deer resources, private discussions, and direct communication to me for planning, you can join Team Backbone at backboneunlimited.com underneath our membership tab. Everything we talk about here is connected. Preparation is not a single video, it's a system. Thanks for being here. I appreciate all of you. I hope to see you in the comments. I read them all. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.